Hey guys, tonight we're going to step into the ultimate time machine, a vessel that travels not just through history, but through the very fabric of reality itself, to witness the most improbable story ever told, the story of us. Imagine for a moment that we are nowhere, and not just an empty, black, star-dusted nowhere, but a true and total nowhere. There is no space. There is no time. No up, no down. Every law of physics, every speck of matter, every pulse of energy that will ever exist in the entire cosmos is crammed into a point of infinite density, smaller than a single atom. Around us is a perfect, silent, absolute nothing. It is the moment before the beginning. But in that nothingness, a change is coming, a cataclysm of such impossible energy that it will invent existence itself. We are at the Big Bang. In a silent, instantaneous flash, everything erupts from that single point. The universe is born, not into space, but as space. It's a seething, incandescent plasma, 1 billion degrees hot, expanding faster than the speed of light. And in that cosmic fire, the particles that will one day become you are forged. The hydrogen in the water you drank today, the carbon that forms the architecture of your cells. It all begins right here, in this first violent second. Fast forward through an eternity. The universe cools, expands, darkens. Gravity begins its patient, relentless work, gathering the primordial dust and gas into unimaginably vast clouds. Over hundreds of millions of years, these clouds collapse, ignite, and become the first stars. Inside their nuclear furnaces, new, heavier elements are created. Oxygen, iron, calcium. These stars live, burn, and die in spectacular supernova explosions, seeding the cosmos with the raw materials for something new. One of those clouds, in a quiet spiral arm of a galaxy we'll one day call the Milky Way, begins to spin. It flattens into a disk, and at its center, a new star ignites. Our sun. The leftover grit and rubble in that disk collide and cling together, forming planets. One of them, the third from the sun, is a molten hellish ball of rock, constantly bombarded by asteroids and comets in the violent chaos of the early solar system. This is the Earth, 4.5 billion years ago. So how do you get from that sterile, glowing rock to a being capable of contemplating its own existence? What mysterious spark turns inert chemistry into restless, striving biology? And was any of this grand cosmic ballet inevitable? Or are you the result of 1 trillion cosmic accidents that, against all odds, broke your way? Thanks to the clues buried in ancient rocks and the incredible story written in our own DNA, tonight we can retrace that impossible journey together to find the answers. Frankly, if you were to try and truly comprehend 1 billion years, your brain would probably just shut down and reboot. It's an operating system designed to remember where the good berries are and not get eaten by a leopard. Not to process timescales that make mountains look like fleeting clouds. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. That small click sends a big signal to the algorithm. That long-form, serious educational content still matters. And to me, it's an incredibly meaningful show of support. Thank you so much for helping keep this channel going strong. It always fascinates me to see where you're all tuning in from. Let me know in the comments where you are in the world and what time it is for you. Now, Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our time machine pushes forward from Earth's violent birth. For nearly 1 billion years, the planet cools. The constant cometary bombardment, once a source of destruction, delivers a gift: water. Steam vents from the planet's core, clouds form, and it begins to rain for millions of years, creating the first global ocean. And somewhere in that warm, chemical-rich water, perhaps in a sunlit, shallow pool, or clinging to a superheated vent in the deep-sea darkness, the spark ignites. The first life appears. Not an animal, not a plant, but a microscopic, single-celled organism. For the next 3 billion years, this is pretty much it. The planet belongs to the microbes. It's a staggering amount of time, an almost unimaginable prologue to our story. To put the 4.5 billion years of Earth's history into perspective, imagine it as a single 24-hour day. The first life appears around 4 a.m. The dinosaurs don't show up until 10:45 p.m., and they're gone by 11:40 p.m. The entire history of the human species, from the very first ape-like creature that stood up to the person you are now, would take place in the last 30 seconds before midnight. We are deep time travelers. The evidence of our journey's beginning is all around us, even today. The faint, uniform glow of microwaves filling all of space is the cooled down, stretched out afterglow of the Big Bang itself, the cosmic microwave background radiation. It's the universe's baby picture. Our time machine glides past the age of dinosaurs. Their thunderous reign ended in a flash of light from the sky. We watch as the survivors, small, furry, nocturnal mammals, emerge from their hiding places into a new world, a world of opportunity. They diversify, grow, and spread across the continents. One group, the primates, takes to the trees. They develop grasping hands, forward-facing eyes for depth perception, and larger brains to process the complex, three-dimensional world of the forest canopy. Now our machine finally begins to slow. The eons stop flying by. We're targeting a specific place and time. The continent is Africa. The era is the late Miocene, pushing into the Pliocene, roughly 6 million years ago. We descend through the clouds, the air growing thick, warm, and heavy with the scent of wet earth and blooming flowers. We settle silently into the undergrowth of a world that is both alien and strangely familiar. This is a dense, lush forest, a world of green, buzzing with the sound of insects you've never heard before. The trees are not the oaks or pines you know, but giant, sprawling figs and hardwoods draped in thick lianas. This is the cradle. This is the stage upon which our story truly begins. You remain perfectly still in the warm, humid air of this 6-million-year-old world. The light that filters through the dense canopy above is green and dappled, painting shifting patterns on the forest floor. The air is out with the drone of insects, the chattering of unseen birds, and a smell of damp soil, sweet decay, and night-blooming jasmine. As your eyes adjust, you begin to see movement. High above, a troop of figures is crashing through the branches. They are not monkeys. They are larger, broader-chested, and they swing with a fluid, powerful grace. They are apes, but they are not the chimpanzees or gorillas you might see in a zoo. They are something more foundational, something that holds the seed of both what we are and what our closest living cousins have become. Let's focus on one of them. He is powerfully built, with long, muscular arms and a dark, leathery face. He moves through the trees with an easy confidence, using his grasping feet almost as skillfully as his hands. He and his troop are searching for ripe figs, their primary source of fuel. For now, life is good. The forest provides everything they need. But this idyllic scene is the end of an era. This creature is standing at a great evolutionary crossroads, and soon its descendants will be forced to choose a path. One path leads to the modern chimpanzee, a creature perfectly adapted to this forest life. The other path, well, that one leads to you. It's tempting to see this ancestor as a simple, early version of ourselves, like a rough draft that needed improving. But that's one of the biggest misunderstandings about evolution. You need to erase the image you might have of a single file of apes, slowly standing up straighter and getting less hairy until they become a modern human. That's not how it worked. The reality is that the family tree of the great apes, including us, is not a ladder of progress. It's a vast, messy, branching bush. Imagine a huge, ancient tree with thousands of branches reaching for the sun. Over millions of years, countless branches grew strong and flourished, only to wither and die off when the climate changed or a new predator emerged. We aren't the peak of this tree. We are just one twig on one branch that has managed, through a combination of adaptation, ingenuity, and sheer dumb luck, to survive until today. Our survival was never guaranteed. The proof of this shared origin, this starting point on the bush, isn't just buried in the ground as fossilized bone. The most powerful evidence is written in the core of your very being, in the nucleus of every cell in your body. It's in your DNA. If you were to unwind that incredible double helix and compare it, letter for letter, with that of a modern chimpanzee or bonobo, you would find that it is 98.8% identical. Let that sink in. All the complexity of human civilization, our art, our music, our science, our cities, it all rests on a genetic difference of just over 1%. That tiny sliver of code is the product of 6 million years of separation. The other 98.8% is our shared inheritance, a living record of the time before our paths diverged, when our ancestors were their ancestors. It's why apes can get human diseases and why we share similar blood types. It's also why we, like all other apes, lack the ability to produce our own vitamin C. Most other mammals can synthesize it in their bodies, but somewhere back in our shared lineage, a gene broke, and we've all had to get our vitamin C from fruit ever since. A quirky, shared genetic flaw that acts like a family birthmark. While the genetic evidence is undeniable, the physical identity of that last common ancestor remains one of prehistory's most sought-after ghosts. Paleontologists still debate the exact creature that represents the last common ancestor between the human and chimpanzee lineages. Fossils from that critical period are incredibly rare, because the acidic floor of a rainforest is one of the worst places for bone to fossilize. We have tantalizing clues, creatures like Orrorin tugenensis or the famous Sahelanthropus, which we will meet soon. But no one has yet found a fossil that we can definitively point to and say, this was it. This is where the story split in two. We are searching for a shadow. For now, you watch the troop forage and socialize. The day is dominated by the search for food, by intricate social grooming that reinforces bonds, and by the occasional noisy squabble over territory or status. It is a stable, successful way of life that has worked for millions of years, but the world itself is becoming unstable. A change is coming that these creatures cannot possibly comprehend, a change that will spell doom for many and, for one particular lineage, provide the catalyst for a whole new way of being. Look to the east. You can't see it from here, but the very ground is groaning and splitting apart. The land is rising, creating a colossal mountain range that will stretch for thousands of miles down the length of the continent. This is the birth of the Great Rift Valley, and with its creation, it will throw a wrench into the climate machine of Africa, setting the stage for the next, and perhaps most critical, act of our story. The fork in the road is approaching. The change begins not as a sudden cataclysm, but as a deep, planetary groan, a geological process so slow it's imperceptible to any single generation. Your view pulls away from the forest floor, rising higher and higher until you see the African continent laid out below you. You are watching time accelerate, millennia slipping by like seconds. Down the eastern side of the continent, from the Red Sea to Mozambique, you see the crust of the earth beginning to stretch, thin, and break apart. Two massive tectonic plates are slowly tearing away from each other. As the land pulls apart, the crust collapses, creating a vast, deep trench. Volcanoes erupt along its edges, spewing lava and ash, while the land on either side is thrust violently upwards, creating colossal mountain ranges. This is the formation of the Great Rift Valley, the largest visible scar on our planet's surface. This geological upheaval is not just reshaping the land, it's reprogramming the climate. These new mountains, rising thousands of feet into the sky, form a formidable wall. For eons, moisture-rich air from the vast Atlantic Ocean and the Congo Basin to the west has flowed freely across the continent, keeping East Africa drenched in a perpetual, humid rainforest. Now, that moisture hits the western wall of the Rift Valley and is forced to rise. As it cools, it dumps its rain, leaving the western side lush and green. But the air that crests the mountains and descends into the east is now dry. A great rain shadow falls over East Africa. The tap is being turned off. You descend back to ground level, 1 million years after your first visit. The world is different. The air is hotter, drier. The constant damp green has been replaced by shades of brown and yellow. The great, unbroken ocean of trees is gone. In its place is a patchwork quilt, a mosaic of landscapes. There are still pockets of dense forest clinging to river valleys and the slopes of volcanoes where more moisture can be found. But between them are vast stretches of open woodland, and beyond that, something new. Grasslands, the savanna, dotted with thorny acacia trees. The seasons have become sharp and distinct. A long, baking dry season is now followed by a life-giving but violent rainy season. This geological event effectively created two separate evolutionary laboratories. To the west of the Rift Valley, the old world continued. The rainforests remained, and the ape populations there simply went on perfecting their adaptations for a life in the trees. Their descendants are the chimpanzees and bonobos we know today, masters of their forest realm. But for the apes caught on the eastern side, in the new mosaic world, it was a catastrophe. Their entire way of life was disappearing. The fruit trees they relied on became scarcer, more spread out. The world that had provided everything for them was slowly, inexorably being taken away. They were trapped. Faced with such a dramatic environmental shift, some scientists have proposed some pretty creative, out-of-the-box theories for how our ancestors adapted. One of the most famous, though not widely accepted, is the aquatic ape hypothesis. The idea suggests that our ancestors, pushed out of the dying forests, didn't head for the savanna, but instead for the coastlines and flooded river valleys. In this version of the story, we spent 1 million years or so living a semi-aquatic life, wading in the shallows. This, the theory argues, could explain some uniquely human traits. Our naked skin was better for swimming. A layer of subcutaneous fat kept us warm in the water like it does for dolphins. And we learned to stand on 2 feet to keep our heads above the surface while foraging for shellfish. It's a fascinating and imaginative idea, but the fossil evidence just isn't there to support it. The story written in the bones points us in another direction, out onto that new, terrifying, open grassland. So the central challenge is now set. You watch a small band of our ancestors huddled in one of the shrinking islands of forest. They are thinner, more anxious than their ancestors you saw before. The fig trees are barren. The dry season has been long. Hunger is a constant companion. From the edge of the trees, their only known world, they can look out over a sea of grass. They can smell the herds of grazing animals out there, a potential source of food. But they can also see the predators. Packs of giant hyenas, saber-toothed cats hiding in the grass. The open savanna is a death sentence for a creature built to escape into the trees. To leave the relative safety of the woods is to be exposed, vulnerable, and slow. The question facing them is the most fundamental question of survival. Do you stay with the failing world you know, or do you risk everything to venture into the terrifying world of the unknown? Their choice, forced upon them by a changing planet, will set our lineage on a completely new and dangerous trajectory. For a long time, the band hesitates at the edge of the trees, torn between the hunger pushing them forward and the terror holding them back. But eventually, necessity wins. One of them, perhaps a young male, takes a few tentative steps out from the tree line. He doesn't knuckle walk like a chimpanzee. Instead, he rises up, unsteadily, onto his back legs. He looks awkward, top-heavy, and incredibly vulnerable. But he is walking. This is the moment. This is the behavior that will change everything. To understand this revolutionary step, our time machine must jump slightly, both in time and space, to a place that for decades, paleoanthropologists never would have thought to look. We leave the Great Rift Valley behind and travel west, over 1,000 miles, to the modern-day nation of Chad, to a wind-swept, sun-scorched landscape that was once the shore of a vast lake. It is here, in 2001, that scientists found a single crushed skull that scrambled our understanding of where the human story began. The fossil was given the name Sahelanthropus chadensis, but its discoverers gave it a local nickname, Tumai, which means hope of life in the Goran language of Chad. At nearly 7 million years old, it is one of the oldest potential human ancestors we have ever found. Finding it so far west was a shock to the system, proving that the crucible of our evolution wasn't confined to a narrow corridor in East Africa. Our earliest ancestors were more widespread, their story more complex than we ever imagined. You are now in a lab, looking at the fossil itself. It's not much to see at first glance. It's distorted, the color of dark sand, and fractured by millions of years of geological pressure. But as a scientist points out the key features, a face begins to emerge from the stone. It is a mosaic, a confusing jumble of the ancient and the new. It has a massive brow ridge, even thicker than a gorilla's, and its brain was tiny, no bigger than a modern chimpanzee's. In those respects, it is entirely ape-like. But then you see the clues that point in a new direction. Its face is surprisingly flat and vertical, not jutting and snout-like as you'd expect. Its canine teeth are small and worn down from the tip like human teeth, not the long, dagger-like fangs a male ape uses for display and fighting. This suggests a different kind of social structure, perhaps one with less aggression between males. But the most important clue, the absolute smoking gun, isn't on the face. It's on the underside of the skull. The scientist carefully turns the fossil over, and you see a small, round opening. The foramen magnum. This is the hole through which the spinal cord exits the brain and enters the spine. Its position tells you everything about how an animal holds its head, and by extension, how it moves. In an ape that walks on all fours, the foramen magnum is positioned at the back of the skull, pointing backward, because its spine is mostly horizontal. In a modern human that walks upright, it's positioned directly at or at the base of the skull, pointing straight down, because our spine is vertical. You look at Tumai's skull. The hole is at the base. It's pointing down. The evidence is inescapable. This 7-million-year-old creature, with its chimp-sized brain and gorilla-like brow, held its head upright on a vertical spine. Tomai walked on 2 legs. Now, this was not the graceful, efficient stride of a modern human. We have to imagine what this first version of bipedalism looked like. It was almost certainly a clumsy, waddling gait. Tumai's body was still built for climbing, with long arms, grasping feet, and powerful shoulder muscles. Walking was likely a part-time activity, a provisional solution for a specific problem. You can picture it. Tumai would spend most of its time in the trees, perfectly at home. But when it had to cross one of those newly formed open patches of ground between one grove of trees and the next, it would rise up and shuffle across as quickly as it could, its eyes scanning the horizon for predators. It was slow, it was inefficient, and it made the creature an easy target. But it was better than the alternative, and it represented a crack of light in the closing door of the forest world. It was the first faltering step on a journey of 1,000,000 miles. That first clumsy shuffle across the open ground by a creature like Tumai raises the most important question of our entire origin story. Why? Why commit to such an awkward, inefficient, and dangerous way of moving? A chimpanzee can sprint on all fours at nearly 25 miles per hour. Those first upright walkers would have been lucky to manage a slow, waddling jog, making them easy prey. There must have been a tremendous evolutionary payoff to justify such a risk. The truth is, there wasn't one single reason we stood up, but a whole suite of powerful advantages that, when combined, made bipedalism the winning ticket in the new world of the savannah. Let's start with the most obvious advantage. Imagine you are one of these early hominins, just a little over 3 feet tall, at the edge of a vast sea of grass that grows as high as your chest. Crouched down, your world is a claustrophobic maze of green and brown stems. You can't see more than a few feet in any direction. Any predator could be silently stalking you, and you'd never know until it was too late. Now, stand up. In an instant, your entire world expands. Your head is above the grass. You can see for hundreds of yards. You can spot the flick of a lion's tail in the distance, see the dust kicked up by a herd of antelope, or notice a column of vultures circling in the sky, which could mean a fresh carcass and a free meal is nearby. Standing up turned you from a potential victim into an informed observer. It was a revolution in information gathering. Next, consider the physical environment itself. The equatorial African sun is brutal. For an animal walking on all fours, its back presents a huge horizontal surface area to the sun's rays at midday, like a giant solar panel absorbing heat. By standing up, you immediately minimize that exposure. Only your head and shoulders take the direct overhead blast of the sun. The rest of your body is vertical, presenting a much slimmer profile. This simple change in posture drastically reduces the amount of solar radiation you absorb. Furthermore, the air just a few feet above the superheated ground is significantly cooler and often has a slight breeze. Standing up lifted your torso and, more importantly, your brain into this cooler layer of air. It was a form of built-in biological air conditioning, crucial for a creature that would eventually evolve a large, heat-sensitive brain and engage in daytime foraging. But the most profound, the most game-changing advantage of all, the one that truly paved the way for everything that followed, was the liberation of the hands. An animal on 4 legs needs all 4 limbs for locomotion. An animal on 2 legs has a pair of limbs free. Think about what this means. You find a tree with a bounty of ripe, calorie-rich fruit. On all 4s, you can only eat what you can fit in your mouth, right there on the spot, out in the open where you are exposed. But if your hands are free, you can gather up an entire armful of that precious food and carry it back to the safety of the trees to eat at your leisure, or, more importantly, to share with your offspring, your mate, or other members of your group. For the first time, you can transport resources. This is a monumental leap. It allows for food sharing, which strengthens social bonds. It allows a mother to carry her dependent infant while still moving and foraging. And eventually, these newly freed hands would be used to carry the first sharpened sticks, the first stone tools, and to remake the world. This transition wasn't easy. It required a radical and comprehensive overhaul of our entire skeletal architecture. The ape body plan, perfected over millions of years for life in the trees, had to be completely re-engineered from the ground up. The foot, once a flexible, grasping appendage like a hand, had to transform into a rigid, arched platform, a shock absorber and a lever for pushing off the ground. The femur had to angle inward from the hip to the knee, placing our feet directly under our center of gravity to keep us from waddling side to side. The pelvis, long and narrow in an ape, became short, broad, and bowl-shaped to support the weight of our internal organs and to provide new anchor points for the powerful gluteal muscles needed to keep our torsos upright. And the spine, once a simple arched bridge, developed the elegant S-shaped curve you have today, acting as a spring to absorb the shock of every footstep. This was not a minor tweak. It was one of the most significant and complex transformations in the history of life, and it came with a heavy price. Every triumph in evolution, every brilliant new adaptation comes with a price tag. There's no free lunch in the natural world. For all the incredible advantages that standing upright gave our ancestors, it was, in the end, a compromise. Our bodies are not perfectly designed machines. They are a messy, beautiful, and often painful record of this ancient trade-off. The ghost of our quadrupedal past haunts us in the form of chronic aches and pains that you might be feeling right now. Think about your lower back. That elegant S-curve in your spine that allows you to balance upright is an engineering nightmare. It's essentially a horizontal arch bridge designed to support weight from above that has been yanked vertically to serve as a load-bearing column. The result is a structure under immense, unnatural pressure, prone to slipped discs, pinched nerves, and the chronic muscle fatigue that sends millions of us to chiropractors and physical therapists. Your knees and ankles, once sharing the load with two other limbs, now bear the entire weight of your body with every step you take. This makes them incredibly susceptible to the sprains, torn ligaments, and grinding wear and tear of arthritis that rarely trouble our chimpanzee cousins. The arches in your feet, which act as brilliant shock absorbers, are a constant battle against gravity, a battle they often lose over time, leading to fallen arches and foot pain. Even hernias are a legacy of standing up. The wall of our abdomen, once a hammock for our organs, is now a vertical retaining wall, struggling to keep everything packed in. But of all the compromises, the most dramatic, the one that would have the most profound impact on our social evolution, happened in the pelvis. As our ancestors became more committed to walking, natural selection favored a narrower, more compact pelvic structure for a more stable and efficient stride. At the same time, another evolutionary trend was just getting started: the expansion of the brain. A bigger brain meant greater intelligence, better problem solving, and a huge survival advantage. For hundreds of thousands of years, these two selective pressures worked together. But eventually, they came into direct, terrifying conflict. This is known as the obstetrical dilemma. A narrow pelvis is great for walking, but it creates a narrow birth canal. A big brain requires a big head. A big head trying to pass through a narrow birth canal is a recipe for disaster. For virtually every other primate, childbirth is a relatively straightforward affair. A female chimpanzee, for instance, gives birth quickly and can often do it alone. Her birth canal is spacious, and the baby's head is small. She can reach down and guide her infant out, clearing its airway and immediately bringing it to her chest. For human females, the experience is completely different. It is uniquely long, agonizing, and until very recently in our history, astonishingly dangerous for both mother and child. Because of the complex shape of the human birth canal, the baby has to twist and turn on its journey out, and crucially, it almost always emerges facing away from the mother, making it impossible for her to guide it or clear its breathing passages herself. This purely anatomical problem forced a profound social solution. It meant that from the very beginning of our lineage, successful childbirth required help. It required a midwife, a mother, a sister, an aunt, another experienced female from the group who could be trusted to be there at the moment of ultimate vulnerability. This is our quirky and defining fact. Humans are one of the few animals that can't effectively give birth alone. This biological imperative for assisted birth hardwired deep social cooperation into the very fabric of our species. Our survival, from the moment we draw our first breath, has been utterly dependent on the trust and empathy of others. So the next time you feel a twinge in your back or a soreness in your knee, remember its ancient origin. It is the price you pay for being the descendant of an ape that dared to stand up. It is the echo of a grand evolutionary bargain, an imperfect solution that gave us the world, but in exchange, it made us fragile. And in that fragility, it forced us to become something new, a creature that could not survive alone, a creature that had to learn to depend on and care for its own kind. The biological imperative to cooperate, forced upon us by the crisis of childbirth, meant that our ancestors had to become experts at living in groups. To see this new way of life in action, our time machine moves forward, from the shadowy world of Taming to a sunnier, more open landscape about 3.2 million years ago. We are now in the age of a new, remarkably successful group of hominins who would dominate the African landscape for over 1 million years, the genus Australopithecus, the southern apes. And within this group, one fossil stands above all others, a single individual who became a global celebrity and the matron of the human family. Her name is Lucy. We travel to the arid, sun-blasted badlands of Hadar, Ethiopia. The year is 1974. A young paleoanthropologist named Donald Johansen is scanning a dusty gully when he spots a fragment of bone. It's not just any bone. It's from the arm of a hominin. As he and his team begin to search the area, they find more and more pieces. A piece of the skull, a thigh bone, ribs, a pelvis. This is not a random jumble of different individuals. Incredibly, they are all from a single skeleton. That night, the celebratory mood in the camp is electric. A tape recorder is playing the Beatles album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And when the song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds comes on, someone suggests they name their discovery Lucy. The name stuck. Finding a single bone of an early ancestor is a triumph. Finding a partial skull is a miracle. To find 40% of a single skeleton, as Johansen's team did, was like finding the Rosetta Stone. For the first time, scientists could see how all the different parts of an early hominin body fit together. Lucy was a female Australopithecus afarensis. She stood just 3.5 feet tall and probably weighed around 60 pounds. Her head was still very ape-like, with a chimp-sized brain and a forward-jutting jaw. But from the neck down, her story becomes much more human. Her pelvis was short and broad, and her femur angled inwards to her knee just like yours does. There was no longer any debate. Lucy walked upright. She was fully bipedal when on the ground. But her skeleton held a fascinating contradiction. While her legs and pelvis were built for walking, her upper body still clung to the trees. She had long, powerful arms that dangled down to her knees, much longer in proportion to her legs than in modern humans. Her finger and toe bones were long and curved, perfect for gripping branches. Her shoulder joints were angled upwards, a key adaptation for hauling yourself up into a tree. Lucy was a perfect example of mosaic evolution, a transitional form. She was a creature of two worlds. You can picture her life. She would spend her days moving efficiently on 2 legs across the open savanna, foraging for roots, tubers, insects, and fruits. But as dusk fell, bringing the nocturnal hunters out of their dens, she and her troop would retreat to the safety of the trees, using those powerful ape-like arms to scramble up to a sleeping nest high above the ground. This dual-world strategy was essential because we need to be very clear about Lucy's position in this ecosystem. Despite walking on 2 legs, she was not the master of her domain. She was not a hunter. She was the hunted. For a small, slow, 3-foot-tall hominin, the savanna was a landscape of terror. The predators of her time were the stuff of nightmares. Saber-toothed cats like the fearsome Dinophiles, giant hyenas capable of crushing bone with a single bite, and enormous eagles that could snatch a small creature from the ground. Life for an Australopithecus was a constant, nerve-shredding state of vigilance. Every rustle in the grass, every shadow passing overhead, spelled potential death. Their groups weren't just for finding food or raising children, they were a shield, a collective set of eyes and ears against a world of teeth and claws. Life was short, and survival depended on sticking together. Fossilized bones can tell us a remarkable amount about what our ancestors looked like and how their bodies worked. But there is another kind of fossil, far rarer and in some ways far more profound. It is a fossil not of a creature, but of a moment. A fossil of a behavior, frozen in time. To see it, we must leave Lucy's Ethiopian home and travel south to Laetoli in Tanzania. The year is 1978. A team led by the legendary paleoanthropologist Mary Leakey is exploring the area. But the discovery they are about to make is not a bone, but a set of tracks. Our time machine takes us back to the moment the tracks were made, 3.6 million years ago. The landscape here is a rolling savanna, dotted with acacia trees. In the distance, the volcano Sadiman stands tall, a plume of smoke and ash rising from its peak. A short time ago, the volcano erupted, blanketing the entire region in a layer of fine grey ash, rich in carbonates. Now a gentle rain has begun to fall. The rain mixes with the ash, creating a perfect, smooth, muddy surface, like a freshly laid sheet of wet cement. As the rain subsides and the clouds part, the world is quiet, damp, and grey. And then, out of a nearby patch of woodland, two figures emerge. They are Australopithecus afarensis, the same species as Lucy. They are small, walking side by side, and they begin to make their way across the fresh, damp ash. They are not alone. A menagerie of other animals has also left its tracks. The hoofprints of three-toed horses, the heavy paws of a saber-toothed cat, the tiny, scurrying feet of guinea fowl. But it's the hominin tracks that are revolutionary. The two individuals walk for about 88 feet, leaving a clear trail of footprints behind them. As they finish their crossing, the tropical sun beats down, baking the ash-mud mixture hard, like ceramic tiles. Before the tracks can be eroded by wind or rain, another eruption from Sadiman gently buries them under a fresh layer of ash, sealing them away, preserving this single moment, this casual stroll, for millions of years. What these footprints provide is the kind of evidence that scientists dream of. It is direct, undeniable proof of bipedalism. This is no longer an inference based on the angle of a thigh bone or the position of a hole in the skull. This is a snapshot of the behavior itself. And what a behavior it was. The tracks are astonishingly modern. The footprints have a clearly defined arch and a deep impression at the heel, showing that these hominins walked with a distinct heel strike, just like you do. As they moved forward, their weight transferred along the outer edge of the foot, and then, for the final propulsive push, it shifted to the ball of the foot and the big toe. Crucially, that big toe is in line with the rest of the foot, not splayed out to the side like an ape's grasping toe. These were not clumsy, shuffling creatures. By 3.6 million years ago, our ancestors had evolved a striding, efficient, and fully committed form of bipedal walking. But beyond the cold, hard science, the Laetoli footprints connect us to our ancestors on a deeply human and emotional level. You look down at the trackway, and you see a story. There are two trails side by side. One set of prints is larger than the other. Was it a male and a female? Perhaps a parent and a teenager? We can never know for sure, but their proximity speaks of companionship, a journey taken together. The stride is short and unhurried. This wasn't a panicked flight from a predator. It was just a walk. At one point, the smaller individual seems to have paused, turned briefly to the left, and then continued on. What caught its attention? A sound? A distant call? And in one of the most tantalizing and debated details of all, it appears in some spots that a third, even smaller individual was walking behind, stepping carefully into the larger footprints left by the one in front. the ghost of a small child, literally following in its parents' footsteps. It is an image so relatable, so familiar, that it closes the immense gap of time between us. It is the 3.6 million-year-old echo of a family walk, a fleeting moment of ordinary life, made eternal by a volcano, a rainstorm, and a stroke of impossible luck. The success of bipedal hominins, like Lucy's species, Australopithecus afarensis, set the stage for a new evolutionary chapter. Their ability to exploit the resources of both the woodland and the savanna was a winning formula, and nature did what it always does with a winning formula. It experimented. The hominin family bush, once just a few tentative shoots, began to sprout new, thicker, and more varied branches. For the next 2 million years, the African landscape was not home to a single human ancestor, but a diverse community of bipedal apes, each with its own unique strategy for survival. Our current state, being the only human species on the planet, is a lonely and recent anomaly. Back then, we had company, we had cousins, and some of them were very, very different from us. Imagine you are sitting on a rocky outcrop overlooking a watering hole about 2.5 million years ago. A small troop of Australopithecines, much like Lucy, comes to drink. They are small, slender, and light-boned. We call them the gracile, or graceful Australopithecines. They are part of the lineage that will eventually lead to us. But a few minutes later, another group of hominins emerges from the brush, and they look altogether different. They are built on a much heavier, more robust plan. Their bodies are stocky and muscular, but it's their heads that are truly astonishing. Their faces are huge, wide, and flat, almost like dinner plates. And when one of them turns to the side to chew, you see the source of their power. A jaw so massive and deep it would make a gorilla jealous, filled with enormous flat molar teeth, some as big as your thumbnail. Running along the top of the male's skull is a prominent ridge of bone, a sagittal crest, which served as the anchor point for immense, powerful chewing muscles. These are the robust Australopithecines, a group so different that they are now placed in their own genus, Sahelanthropus, which means beside man. They were our evolutionary cousins, a parallel branch of the family that embarked on a completely different evolutionary path. Nicknamed Nutcracker Man, their entire anatomy was a testament to one thing: overwhelming chewing power. While our ancestors, the gracile line, were becoming generalists. Eating a wide variety of foods, Sahelanthropus became the ultimate specialists. They evolved to eat the tough stuff, the low-quality, fibrous foods that no one else could handle. Their massive molars acted like grinding mills, pulverizing tough roots, gritty tubers, hard-shelled nuts, and fibrous bark. For over 1.5 million years, this was an incredibly successful strategy. While our ancestors struggled to find ripe fruits or scavenge meat, Sahelanthropus could always rely on their fallback foods, the botanical equivalent of hardtack and shoe leather. They thrived, spreading across Africa in several different species. They were not our ancestors, but for a very long time, they were our successful and perhaps more numerous contemporaries. They are a powerful reminder that there was more than one way to make a living as a bipedal ape. But then, about 1 million years ago, they vanished from the fossil record. Why did this successful, long-lived lineage die out while ours survived? The answer likely lies in the classic evolutionary trade-off between being a specialist and being a generalist. Specialists do incredibly well when conditions are stable. But when the climate changes and their specific food source disappears, they are left with no alternatives. Generalists, on the other hand, may not be perfectly adapted to any one thing, but their flexibility allows them to switch to other resources when their preferred food is scarce. As Africa continued to experience wild swings in climate, our generalist ancestors, with their more varied diet, were better equipped to roll with the punches. This has led to one of the most interesting scholarly debates in the field. Anthropologists argue whether the invention of tool use by our line, the gracile Australopithecines, gave us the adaptive edge that allowed us to outcompete our Paranthropus cousins. Did our growing cleverness, our ability to use stones to process food that our teeth couldn't handle, give us the crucial flexibility that they, for all their biological power, lacked? We may never know for sure, but their ghosts serve as a vital lesson. Evolution doesn't always reward the strongest. Sometimes it rewards the most adaptable. While our robust cousins, the Paranthropus, were investing their evolutionary energy into building bigger and better biological grinding machines, our own lineage took a radically different path. Faced with the same environmental pressures, our ancestors didn't evolve more powerful jaws. They evolved bigger, more creative brains. Around 2.8 million years ago, a new kind of hominin appears in the fossil record. It was still small, with long arms like its Australopithecine ancestors, but its head was different. The jaw was smaller, the face less projecting, and the brain case was noticeably larger and more rounded. The difference was significant enough that its discoverers, Louis and Mary Leakey, decided it could no longer be called an Australopithecus. They placed it in our own genus, making it the earliest known member of our human family. They named it Homo habilis, the handy man. The name was a nod to the fact that this hominin was found surrounded by the first crude stone tools. But the bigger brain and the new tools were not separate developments. They were two sides of the same coin, linked by a crucial shift in diet. You see, a brain is the most metabolically expensive organ in the body. Your brain, right now, while making up only about 2% of your body weight, is consuming 20% of your oxygen and calories. You cannot fuel a big brain on a diet of tough, low-quality plants. It's like trying to run a supercomputer on a couple of AA batteries. For our ancestors to afford this new, greedy brain, they had to find a new source of high-energy, calorie-dense food. That food was meat. Now we have to be very careful with our imagery here. Homo habilis was not a mighty hunter. They were still small, relatively slow, and lacked any natural weapons like claws or sharp teeth. They were certainly not chasing down and killing large animals. Instead, they became the world's most ingenious scavengers. They were masters of opportunity, using their intelligence and cooperation to get a share of a kill made by a real predator. Picture the scene. A saber-toothed cat has killed a large antelope. It eats its fill of the prime muscle and organs, and then, fat and lazy, wanders off to rest in the shade. Immediately the second wave of scavengers descends. Vultures from the sky, a pack of hyenas moving in from the plains. But now, a new player enters the game. A troop of Homo habilis arrives. They don't just wait for the scraps. This is confrontational scavenging. They work as a team. They yell, wave their arms, and hurl rocks at the hyenas, creating enough of a coordinated ruckus to drive the other scavengers back for a few precious minutes. In that window, they swarm the carcass, not with powerful jaws, but with something far more effective: tools. While they would have sliced off any remaining scraps of meat, the real prize, the hidden treasure they were after, was locked away inside the bones. After a predator and other scavengers have picked a carcass clean, the skeleton remains. And inside the thick leg bones of a large grazer is a substance of almost perfect nutritional value. Bone marrow. It's a pure, concentrated source of the fats and proteins essential for building a bigger brain. This was a food source that was completely inaccessible to almost every other creature on the savannah. The saber-tooth couldn't get it. The hyena, for all its bone-crushing power, often couldn't get to the marrow in the largest bones. But for a clever tool-wielding bipedal ape, this was a jackpot, a calorie-rich bank vault just waiting to be opened. All they needed was the key. And that key, a simple piece of sharpened stone, would not only unlock this vital new food source, it would unlock the future of humanity. The key that unlocked the calorie bank inside the bones was not a product of biological evolution, but of cultural and technological evolution. It was an idea brought to life by two hands and a clever mind. This new technology, the very first in a line that leads directly to the device you're listening on now, is known as the Oldowan Toolkit, named after the famous Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, where these tools were first found in abundance. When you see one in a museum, your first impression might be disappointment. It just looks like a broken rock, something you might trip over on a hike. There are no finely crafted spearheads or arrowheads. The Oldowan toolkit was something much more fundamental. We have to erase the image of these tools as weapons. They were not primarily used for hunting. They were a butcher's kit. The toolkit consisted of two essential, complementary parts. The first is the core, a round, fist-sized cobblestone, often of a hard, fine-grained material like flint or chert. By striking this core with another hard rock, a hammerstone, our ancestors would knock off several pieces. This shaped core, with its new, jagged edges, is what we call a chopper. For a long time, archaeologists thought these choppers were the main invention. But we now know the real genius lay in the pieces that were knocked off. These were the flakes. A freshly struck stone flake has an edge that is microscopically sharp, far sharper than a steel scalpel and exponentially sharper than any predator's tooth. These simple, disposable flakes were the world's first razor blades. Let's walk through the process of making one. First, you have to find the right raw materials. This isn't a random act. You need to know your landscape, to have a mental map of where to find the good stones, the ones that will fracture in a predictable way. This itself is a sign of planning and forethought. You select a smooth, heavy cobblestone for your core and another for your hammerstone. You hold the core in one hand and the hammerstone in the other. Now comes the cognitive leap. You are not just going to smash these rocks together. You have to understand, on an intuitive level, the principles of conchoidal fracture. You have to see the tool hiding inside the stone. You have to find the perfect angle, just right, and strike the core with a sharp, glancing blow. Crack. A flake leaps from the stone. You turn the core, find a new angle, and strike again. Crack. Another flake. In less than a minute, you have a heavy, sharp-edged chopper in one hand and a handful of lethally sharp flakes on the ground. This simple act represents a monumental shift in consciousness. It is the ability to look at a raw material and see its potential, to plan a sequence of actions to achieve a desired result. It is the birth of engineering. It's a thought process that no chimpanzee, for all its intelligence, has ever mastered in the wild. Now, back at the scavenged carcass, the purpose of this toolkit becomes clear. The tough, leathery hide of a large antelope is almost impossible to tear with bare hands and teeth. But one of these sharp little flakes slices through it like a knife. You can quickly dismember a limb and carry it away. You can slice off strips of meat from the bone. The flakes did the work that our teeth were no longer equipped for. Then, once you have a large femur bone, you place it on a rock acting as an anvil. You take the heavy core, the chopper, and you bring it down with force. With a loud crack, the bone splits open, revealing the rich, fatty, glistening marrow inside. This was it. This was the key to the vault. A simple broken rock, a product of a growing mind, had just unlocked a new world of energy, and that energy, in turn, would go on to fuel the very brain that had invented it. The invention of that first simple stone tool wasn't just a clever trick. It was the starting pistol for a revolutionary new kind of evolution. It kicked off one of the most powerful forces in natural history, a positive feedback loop. This is a cycle where each development amplifies the next, creating a self-reinforcing upward spiral of change that, once started, is almost impossible to stop. For the next 2 million years, this feedback loop between tools, food, and brains would be the primary engine of our story. It works like this. You start with the breakthrough, the creation of a simple tool. This tool, as we've seen, gives you access to a brand new, high-quality food source: meat, and especially bone marrow. This new diet, rich in calories, protein, and fat, has a surprising and profound effect on your anatomy. You see, brains aren't the only metabolically expensive organ in the body. A large and complex digestive system is also a huge energy hog. A creature that eats tough, fibrous plants needs a very long and elaborate gut to ferment and extract the nutrients. Just look at a cow with its multiple stomachs. This is a massive energy investment. But meat and marrow are different. They are incredibly calorie-dense and easy to digest. This leads to a crucial evolutionary trade-off, something scientists call the expensive tissue hypothesis. As our ancestors began to rely more on easily digestible meat, they no longer needed such a huge, energy-guzzling digestive tract. Over generations, the gut began to shrink. But that energy didn't just vanish into thin air. The body is a budget, and the energy saved in one department can be reallocated to another. That surplus energy, freed up from the shrinking gut, was diverted to the other most expensive organ in the body, the brain. So, a better diet allows for a smaller gut, which frees up energy to fuel a bigger brain. And what does a bigger, more complex brain do? It thinks of better, more sophisticated tools. It can plan more complex scavenging strategies. It can communicate more effectively within a social group. These improved tools and behaviors allow it to acquire even more high-quality food, which in turn allows for an even smaller gut, which frees up even more energy for an even bigger brain. And so the cycle continues, spiraling upwards. Better tools lead to better food, which leads to a bigger brain, which leads to better tools. This is the engine of what we call encephalization, the dramatic increase in brain size that defines the evolution of our genus, Homo. It's impossible to overstate just how greedy our brains are. The modern human brain, weighing only about 3 pounds, makes up just 2% of your total body weight, yet it consumes a staggering 20% of your energy when you're just sitting still. It is a ravenous, power-hungry supercomputer. This single quirky fact highlights why the shift to a meat-based diet was not just a minor upgrade, but an absolute prerequisite for becoming human. Without that dense, reliable source of energy, the feedback loop could never have started, and our brains would have remained the size of a chimpanzee's. This new evolutionary strategy was a radical departure from the norm. Our ancestors were beginning to solve the problems of survival, not just with their bodies, but with their minds. Instead of evolving stronger teeth, they invented a sharper stone. Instead of evolving a tougher gut, they began to use tools to pre-process their food. This shift from biological adaptation to cultural and technological adaptation was the secret to our success. It allowed us to adapt faster and more flexibly than genetic evolution ever could, setting our lineage on a path that would eventually lead us out of Africa and across the entire planet. The powerful feedback loop between brains, tools, and food created a new kind of hominin, one forged in the crucible of the open savanna. Around 1.9 million years ago, a creature appears that is so different, so much more like us, that it represents a new chapter in the human story. Taller, smarter, and more ambitious than any who came before, this was Homo erectus, the upright man. The name is a bit of a historical relic. We now know that hominins had been walking upright for millions of years, but it captures the spirit of a species that took bipedalism to a whole new level. If Homo habilis was a prototype, Homo erectus was the upgraded production model. Their brains were significantly larger, leaping forward in size and complexity. But the most striking change was in their bodies. For the first time, we see a hominin with truly human-like body proportions. They were tall and slender, some standing over 6 feet, with long, powerful legs and, crucially, short arms. The ape-like proportions of Lucy and the handyman were gone. You could have dressed a Homo erectus in modern clothes, and from a distance they might not have looked entirely out of place walking down a modern street. This anatomical shift signals a profound commitment. By losing their long, climbing arms and curved fingers, Homo erectus had abandoned the trees for good. There was no scrambling back to safety at night. They were now fully terrestrial, living their entire lives on the ground, a bold and irreversible evolutionary gamble. So why the new body plan? Why the long legs and the athletic build? The answer may lie in a revolutionary new strategy for acquiring food, a theory known as the endurance running hypothesis. Homo habilis was a clever scavenger, but Homo erectus became a true hunter. The problem is they still lacked effective projectile weapons like bows or throwing spears. How do you kill a fast animal like a gazelle or a wildebeest when you can't out-sprint it and you can't kill it from a distance? The solution was to not try to be faster, but to have more stamina. Homo erectus became a persistence hunter. The strategy was brutally simple and effective. A hunter or a small group would target an animal in their herd and simply start jogging after it. The gazelle, seeing a predator, would panic and sprint away at high speed. The erectus hunter would not give chase at full speed. They would just keep a steady, relentless jog, following the animal's tracks. Eventually, the gazelle, thinking it was safe, would stop to rest. But soon, that strange, loping figure would appear on the horizon again. The gazelle would sprint off once more. This process would repeat again and again, for hours, under the blistering heat of the midday African sun. This is where our unique human anatomy shines. The gazelle, like most mammals, is a sprinter, built for short, explosive bursts of speed. It is also covered in a thick coat of fur and can only cool down by panting. We, on the other hand, are the best long-distance runners in the animal kingdom. Our long legs, springy Achilles tendons, and powerful gluteal muscles make us incredibly efficient joggers. But our true superpower is our cooling system. Homo erectus had lost its thick coat of body hair and had evolved millions of sweat glands. As they ran, their bodies were slick with sweat, which evaporated in the breeze, efficiently shedding heat. The fur-covered gazelle, forced to sprint repeatedly in the heat, couldn't get rid of its internal heat fast enough. Eventually, after hours of being relentlessly pursued, the animal would simply collapse from hypothermia, heat stroke. The Homo erectus hunter, still jogging, could then walk up and dispatch their exhausted prey with a simple stone tool. This was a new level of predation, one based not on speed or strength, but on sheer, dogged persistence and the unique gift of sweating. This new identity as a hunter gave them a more reliable and richer food source than ever before, fueling the continued growth of their brains and giving them the confidence to stride out of Africa and into a wider world. Armed with their athletic bodies and their new identity as hunters, bands of Homo erectus began to push the boundaries of their world. For millions of years, the story of our ancestors was an exclusively African one. But now, for the very first time, a human species walked out of its ancestral homeland and did not turn back. This was not a single great expedition with a map and a destination. It was likely a slow, creeping expansion, a journey of 1,000 generations. Each generation, perhaps following the migratory herds that were their new food source, pushed a few miles further into unknown territory. Over thousands of years, this slow diffusion took them out of Africa, across the Sinai Peninsula, and into the vast continent of Asia. We can trace their incredible journey by the trail of fossils and tools they left behind. Some of the oldest Homo erectus fossils outside of Africa are found at Dmanisi, in the modern-day Republic of Georgia, dated to nearly 1.8 million years ago. From there, they spread east. They reached Indonesia, where the first ever Homo erectus fossil, Java man, was found in the 1890s. They pushed north into China, where the famous Peking man fossils were discovered. They also spread west into Europe. They were the first truly global human species, pioneers who walked into a world no hominin had ever seen. This expansion was a monumental test of their adaptability. Leaving the relatively stable tropical environment of Africa meant confronting challenges they were not biologically evolved for. They encountered true winters for the first time, with snow and freezing temperatures. They faced entirely new predators, new diseases, and unfamiliar plants and animals. To survive in these new lands required a new level of ingenuity and a much better toolkit. The simple Oldowan chopper was no longer enough. To meet these new challenges, Homo erectus invented a new, revolutionary piece of technology, the Acheulean hand axe. If the Oldowan chopper was a broken rock, the Acheulean hand axe was a sculpture. It is the iconic artifact of the Paleolithic, a beautiful, symmetrical, teardrop-shaped tool. Unlike the chopper, which was crudely worked on one side, the hand axe is bifacial, meaning it has been carefully flaked on both sides to produce a sharp, continuous cutting edge all the way around. It fits perfectly in the human hand, a testament to its creators. It was the first multi-tool, the Swiss Army knife of its day. Its sharp point could be used to pierce hides, its long, sharp edges were for slicing and butchering, and its heavy base could be used for chopping wood or smashing bone. What is most astonishing about the hand axe is its longevity and consistency. This single design remained the dominant human technology for over 1.5 million years. Let that sink in. The entire history of modern human civilization, from the pyramids to the smartphone, is a mere 5,000 years. This tool lasted 300 times longer than that. Even more remarkably, the design is almost identical Whether the axe was found in a riverbed in England, a cave in Africa, or a plain in India. This incredible consistency tells us something profound about the mind of Homo erectus. You can create a simple older one chopper through imitation, or even by accident. You cannot create a symmetrical Acheulean hand axe that way. To produce that specific, standardized shape, time and time again requires a clear mental template, an idea of the finished product that you hold in your mind. The fact that this template was shared across continents and generations is powerful evidence that the knowledge of how to make it was being actively taught and passed down. This wasn't just tool use, this was culture. It suggests a more complex form of communication and social learning than anything that had come before. The hand axe, then, is more than a tool. It is a fossilized idea, proof of a mind that could not only solve a problem, but could also appreciate symmetry, planning, and form. The symmetrical hand axe, consistent across continents and millennia, gives us our first real glimpse into the mind of Homo erectus. While we can never truly know what they thought or felt, their actions and their creations serve as archaeological clues to their inner world. And these clues point to a cognitive landscape that was becoming far more complex, a mind that was beginning to look like our own. Let's consider the mental skills required for their way of life. The creation of a hand axe, as we've seen, demanded abstract thought, the ability to hold a three-dimensional blueprint in the mind and impose it onto a raw piece of stone. It required foresight and planning. The act of persistence hunting was as much a mental marathon as a physical one. It required incredible focus, the ability to track an animal over hours or even days, to read the landscape, and perhaps most importantly, to delay gratification. This wasn't the impulsive, opportunistic scavenging of their ancestors. This was a deliberate, planned, and protracted effort. Their ability to spread across the entire Old World also implies they had solved the challenges of maintaining social cohesion in larger groups. To coordinate hunts, to defend against dangerous predators, and to live together in a challenging new environment, they needed a more sophisticated social intelligence. They needed to understand the intentions of others, to form alliances, to enforce group norms, and to share knowledge. But perhaps the most compelling evidence for a dawning humanity comes not from their tools or their travels, but from a single, toothless skull found in Dmanisi, Georgia. The fossil, known as Skull 4, belonged to an old man. What is remarkable is that he had lost all but one of his teeth years before he died. The bone of his jaw had completely healed over where his teeth had once been, a process that takes a long time. Now, think about what this means for a pre-agricultural hunter-gatherer. Without teeth, you cannot chew tough raw meat. You cannot process fibrous plants or hard nuts. In the harsh world of the Pleistocene, a toothless individual would be helpless. They would starve. Yet this old man lived for years after losing his ability to feed himself. The only possible way he could have survived is if someone else was caring for him. Members of his group must have been bringing him soft, easy-to-eat foods, like bone marrow, or perhaps even pre-chewing his food for him. This is one of the earliest pieces of evidence we have for true, compassionate care for the old and the infirm. This wasn't about a mother caring for her child, something we see in many animal species. This was about the group taking responsibility for a non-contributing, vulnerable member. It hints at the presence of empathy, of a sense of social obligation, and of bonds that went beyond simple reciprocal exchange. It is a profound glimmer of a new kind of morality. How did they coordinate these complex behaviors, teaching tool-making, organizing a hunt, caring for the elderly? This question leads directly to one of the most fascinating and contentious topics in human evolution: the origin of language. The social world of Homo erectus seems too complex for simple grunts and gestures. Because of this, researchers debate whether Homo erectus had a proto-language, more complex than ape calls, but short of the full syntax of modern human speech. Think of it not as a language for telling stories, but as a powerfully functional communication system. It might have consisted of simple two-word phrases: bring stone, follow gazelle, danger lion. It was likely a language of the here and now, a tool for getting things done. But this practical proto-language was the crucial scaffolding upon which the great edifice of human language would eventually be built. The mind of Homo erectus was a new frontier, a place of planning, cooperation, and the first stirrings of compassion, on the very cusp of finding its voice. The mind of Homo erectus, with its capacity for planning, cooperation, and even compassion, was poised for another leap forward. This next revolution would not be one of stone, but of energy. It was a discovery that would bring light into the darkness, warmth into the cold, and fundamentally alter our place in the natural world. It was the mastery of fire. For every animal on this planet, from the smallest insect to the largest elephant, fire is a primal signal of terror. A lightning strike ignites the dry savanna grass, and a wall of flame sweeps across the landscape. The instinctive, hard-wired response is to flee. For millions of years, our ancestors shared this instinct. Fire was a destructive monster, a thing of chaos and death that sent them scrambling for safety into the very trees their ancestors had abandoned. It was the ultimate uncontrollable force of nature. And the story of our humanity is, in many ways, the story of learning to control the uncontrollable. The first steps on this journey were likely tentative and born of opportunism. Imagine a band of Homo erectus coming across a tree that was struck by lightning the night before. It is still smoldering, casting a strange warmth. They are wary, but their growing curiosity overcomes their fear. They notice that other animals, even the great predators, keep a wide berth. They discover the roasted bodies of small animals caught in the blaze, and find the meat is not only tastier, but far easier to chew and digest. This is the first lesson. Fire can be useful. The next, much bolder step is to try and capture it. A brave individual might have used a large piece of bark to scoop up a glowing ember, carefully carrying the precious, dangerous cargo back to their home base, a cave or a sheltered rock overhang. Then came the challenge of keeping it alive, feeding it a steady diet of dry grass and twigs, protecting it from the rain. For thousands of generations, this might have been the extent of our relationship with fire. We were not fire makers, but fire tenders, reliant on the lucky chance of a lightning strike. The real revolution, the moment that truly changed everything, was the leap from tending fire to making fire at will. This was the difference between capturing a wild wolf and domesticating dogs. It was a fundamental shift in power. We were no longer passive recipients of nature's gifts. We were creators. We could summon this powerful force whenever and wherever we needed it, perhaps by striking pyrite against flint to create a spark, or by tirelessly spinning a wooden drill to generate heat through friction. We had tamed the sun. Finding definitive proof of this monumental achievement in the deep past is incredibly difficult. A simple campfire doesn't leave much behind for archaeologists to find 1,000,000 years later. Ash blows away, charcoal degrades. For decades, the evidence was tantalizing, but often ambiguous. But then, deep inside a place called Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa, scientists found the smoking gun. They analyzed ancient sediments from over 300 feet inside the cave, far beyond the reach of any sunlight or natural wildfire. And within those million-year-old layers, they found exactly what they were looking for: microscopic, ashed plant remains and tiny fragments of charred animal bone. The location was key. A fire that deep inside a cave could not have been started by a lightning strike. It had to have been brought there and maintained intentionally. The evidence showed not just a single fire, but repeated controlled fires in the same location over a vast period. This was it. This was the proof that over 1 million years ago, Homo erectus was not just a fire tenders. They were masters of fire. They were bringing it into their homes, using it as a central part of their daily lives. This was a Promethean moment, a true point of no return. By conquering their primal fear and harnessing one of nature's most powerful forces, our ancestors had taken a definitive step away from the rest of the animal kingdom. Fire was not just another tool in their kit. It was a force that would reforge the very biology of our species and reshape the structure of our society. Having tamed fire, our ancestors now possessed a powerful new tool. So, what was its killer app? The warmth it provided was a huge advantage, allowing them to survive cold nights and push into temperate climates. The protection it offered, creating a circle of light that kept the great nocturnal predators at bay, was a game-changer for safety. But the most profound, most transformative use of fire happened in what we can now call the world's first kitchen. The most important thing that Homo erectus did with fire was use it to cook their food. This may seem simple, but the act of cooking is one of the most significant and revolutionary technologies our species has ever invented. To understand why, you have to think of cooking as a form of digestion that happens outside of the body. When you place a piece of meat or a starchy tuber into a fire, the heat begins a chemical process that your own stomach would otherwise have to do. It starts to break down the tough collagen in meat, making it tender. It gelatinizes the complex carbohydrates in plants, turning them from indigestible grit into soft, sweet energy. You are using the external energy of the fire to do the hard work of digestion before the food ever passes your lips. This pre-digestion had 3 enormous benefits. First, it made food safer. Raw meat, especially scavenged meat, is often teeming with harmful bacteria and parasites. A few minutes in a hot fire would have neutralized most of these invisible threats, dramatically reducing the incidence of disease and increasing survival rates. Second, it made food easier to eat. The jaws and teeth of Homo erectus were already getting smaller than their ancestors. Cooking softened food, meaning less time and energy were spent on the exhausting, purely mechanical act of chewing. But the third benefit is the one that changed our evolutionary trajectory forever. Cooking unlocks calories. A chimpanzee spends up to 6 hours a day just chewing, and even then, its digestive system struggles to extract all the potential energy from its raw food. The same is true for us. Eating raw food is incredibly inefficient. By cooking, our ancestors were able to get far more energy out of the exact same amount of food. A cooked piece of meat delivers significantly more net calories than a raw one because your body doesn't have to work as hard to process it. This massive influx of easily available energy was like pouring high-octane fuel into the feedback loop we talked about earlier. The gut, already shrinking thanks to the inclusion of meat in the diet, could now shrink even further, freeing up yet more metabolic energy to be reallocated to the power-hungry, rapidly expanding brain. This idea is the basis for what has become a famous and still somewhat quirky scientific theory. Harvard primatologist Richard Wrangham has argued that it wasn't just tool use or meat eating that made us human. It was specifically the act of cooking. In his cooking hypothesis, he claims that the dramatic anatomical changes we see in Homo erectus, their smaller jaws, smaller teeth, smaller gut, and especially their massive leap in brain size, are biologically impossible without the regular consumption of cooked food. He argues that this single technological innovation is what drove the final, definitive split between our ape-like ancestors and our truly human ones. As he puts it, cooking is what truly made us human. Think about it. Every time you turn on a stove, light a grill, or use a microwave, you are engaging in the foundational technology of our species. It's an act so routine we barely give it a second thought, yet it is the single invention that fed our growing brains, reshaped our bodies from the inside out, and gave us the energetic advantage we needed to build the world we now inhabit. But its effects weren't just biological. The act of gathering around a fire to cook and share a meal would have an equally profound impact on our minds and our society. The invention of cooking transformed our bodies, but the invention of the campfire transformed our minds. The simple act of gathering around a controlled fire, the hearth, fundamentally re-engineered the very structure of hominin society. It changed the rhythm of our daily lives and created a new space for the development of human culture. First, let's consider the immediate, practical benefits. For a tropical primate whose ancestors had never known a real winter, fire was a portable furnace. It allowed Homo erectus to survive the freezing nights of temperate climates, a critical advantage that fueled their expansion into Europe and Asia. A band of hominins, huddled together around a crackling fire, could endure an ice age winter that would have otherwise meant certain death. But even more important than warmth was security. For millions of years, the night had belonged to the predators. Darkness was a time of terror, a sensory world where our eyes were useless, and the great nocturnal hunters, saber-toothed cats, cave lions, giant hyenas, had the supreme advantage. The night was something to be survived, hopefully, in the high branches of a tree. The campfire changed all that. It created a shimmering, moving bastion of light in the oppressive darkness. The primal fear of fire that drove most animals away now worked in our favor. A band of hominins gathered around a bright fire was a formidable thing. The hearth became a fortress, a circle of safety that broke the tyranny of the night. This newfound security had a profound consequence. It fundamentally altered the human day. Before fire, the day's activities, foraging, hunting, tool-making, ended abruptly at sunset. The night was a time of hiding and sleeping. But the fire extended the day. It created a new, usable period of time between dusk and sleep. This was social time, a few precious hours of relative safety and comfort that had never existed before. And in this new time, a new kind of society was forged. The hearth became the central hub of human life, a social magnet that pulled the group together. After the day's labor, the band would gather around the flames. This was the time for sharing the food that had just been cooked, reinforcing the vital rules of reciprocity and cooperation that held the group together. In the soft glow of the firelight, they could continue their work, patiently flaking a new hand axe or repairing a wooden spear. But most importantly, this was time for each other. It was time for social bonding, for reinforcing alliances, and for communication that went beyond the simple, functional commands needed for a hunt. It is here, in the flickering light and dancing shadows of the million-year-old hearth, that we can imagine the true birth of storytelling. With bellies full of cooked food and the fear of predators held at bay, the mind was free to wander. The proto-language that had evolved for practical purposes could now be used for something more. This was the perfect setting to recount the events of the day's hunt, where the prey was found, how it behaved, the moment of the kill. This was the classroom where elders could pass on vital knowledge to the young, teaching them about the landscape, about animal behavior, about which plants were safe to eat. The fire itself, with its mesmerizing, ever-changing patterns, would have stimulated the imagination. The hearth became the world's first living room, its first workshop, and its first theater. It transformed a simple band of apes into a community, and turned a temporary campsite into a true home. The light of the fire didn't just push back the physical darkness, it pushed back the social and mental darkness as well, illuminating the dawn of human culture. The fire-wielding, tool-making Homo erectus was an incredible success story, a species that dominated the old world for well over 1 million years. But evolution never stands still. The scattered populations of erectus in Africa, Asia, and Europe began to diverge, adapting to their local environments. In the cold, harsh crucible of Ice Age Europe, a new and remarkable type of human evolved. They are the most famous of all our extinct relatives, a name that has become synonymous with the very idea of a caveman. They are the Neanderthals. Now, I want you to take the image you probably have in your head of a Neanderthal, a stooped, hairy, dim-witted, club-wielding brute, and throw it away. That stereotype is one of the longest-running and most unfair public relations disasters in all of science. It's a caricature born of a mistake made over a century ago. The very first complete Neanderthal skeleton to be studied, an individual known as the Old Man of La Chapelle-aux-Saints, was, as his name suggests, an old man. He was suffering from a severe case of debilitating arthritis that had crippled his joints and bent his spine. The French paleontologist who analyzed him in the early 1900s reconstructed him as a shuffling, ape-like creature, and that image of a clumsy, primitive subhuman has been stuck in our popular culture ever since. That reconstruction was completely wrong. Let's replace that myth with the reality. A real Neanderthal, Homo neanderthalensis, was a formidable and sophisticated human. They were, on average, a little shorter than us, with males standing around 5.5 feet tall. But they were immensely powerful. Their bodies were incredibly robust and wide, with a barrel chest and thick, heavy bones that supported massive muscles. Think less of a marathon runner and more of a modern powerlifter or wrestler. This was a body built for power and endurance in a tough, physically demanding world. Their skulls were also distinctively different from our own. They were longer and lower, with a face that projected forward in the middle. They had a prominent, double-arched brow ridge that sat over their large eye sockets, and a feature you lack entirely, a large nose that jutted out from their face, likely an adaptation to warm and humidify the frigid, dry air of the Ice Age before it hit their lungs. At the back of their skull, they often had a bulge, known as an occipital bun. But the most surprising feature was on the inside. The average Neanderthal brain was not smaller than ours. It was larger. The volume of their brain case was, on average, about 10% bigger than that of modern humans living today. While brain size alone is not a perfect measure of intelligence, and their brains were shaped differently from ours, this simple fact utterly demolishes the myth of the dim-witted brute. The Neanderthals were not a primitive, failed experiment. They were a hugely successful and intelligent species, supremely adapted to their environment. Their short, stocky body plan was a perfect biological solution for conserving heat in a brutally cold world. For over 300,000 years, they thrived in the challenging, unstable climate of Ice Age Europe, a landscape filled with terrifying megafauna like woolly mammoths, woolly rhinos, and giant cave bears. They were not our ancestors, but a sister species, our closest extinct cousins. They were a parallel and equally valid form of humanity that shared this planet with us for a very long time. A creature with a brain larger than your own is not going to be living a simple life. The intelligence of the Neanderthals is not a matter of speculation. It is written in stone, in bone, and in the very earth of the caves they called home. When we look at the evidence they left behind, we see a culture of profound technological skill, incredible courage, and most surprisingly of all, the first stirrings of art and spirituality. Let's start with their tools. The all-purpose hand axe of Homo erectus was a brilliant invention, but Neanderthal technology was a quantum leap forward. They developed a sophisticated method of tool-making known as the Mousterian industry, which centered on an ingenious process called the Levallois technique. This technique requires a level of planning and abstract thought that is truly impressive. Instead of just chipping away at a rock until it looked right, a Neanderthal toolmaker would first meticulously prepare a core of flint, shaping it in a precise, predetermined way. The goal wasn't the core itself. The goal was the flake that would come off it. After all that careful preparation, a single, final, perfectly placed strike would detach a flake that was the exact size and shape desired. A perfect spear point, a sharp knife, or a hide scraper, sharp and ready to use right off the core. It's the Stone Age equivalent of a sculptor preparing a block of marble for hours just to make one perfect finishing cut. Their toolkit wasn't one size fits all. It was a set of specialized instruments for a variety of tasks. And they needed every one of those tools because they were hunting some of the most dangerous animals on the planet. Neanderthals were not just scavengers or hunters of small game. They were apex predators, regularly taking on the Ice Age megafauna. We have found their spear points embedded in the bones of woolly mammoths, woolly rhinos, and giant cave bears. Because they lacked effective long-range projectile weapons like the bow and arrow, their hunting method was terrifyingly intimate and dangerous. They had to get in close, using heavy, stone-tipped spears in powerful, close-quarters thrusts. The physical evidence of this lifestyle is etched into their skeletons. Many Neanderthal fossils show a pattern of severe and often healed traumatic injuries. Broken arms, fractured skulls, crushed ribs. That is strikingly similar to the injury pattern seen in one specific group of modern humans, professional rodeo riders. They lived a tough, brutal, and courageous life, confronting enormous beasts face to face. But their minds were not solely occupied with survival. They had an inner world, a capacity for symbolic thought. In their caves we find lumps of black manganese dioxide and red ochre, mineral pigments that were ground up and likely used as body paint or for other decorations. They were making art, expressing identity. At some sites in Europe, archaeologists have found collections of eagle talons, carefully notched to be strung together as a necklace or pendant. They collected dark, striking feathers from birds like raptors and crows, likely for personal adornment. This is not the behavior of a creature concerned only with its next meal. This is evidence of a sense of self, of aesthetics, and of a desire to communicate identity. The most profound evidence of all, however, comes from how they treated their dead. At sites across Europe and the Middle East, from Shanida Cave in Iraq to La Ferracie in France, we have found clear evidence that Neanderthals intentionally buried their dead. These were not just bodies left to be scavenged. They were placed carefully in prepared graves. Often, the deceased was laid in a flexed, fetal position. The very act of burial implies a deep and complex response to death. It suggests grief, respect for the deceased, and a separation of the living from the dead. It may even suggest the first glimmerings of a metaphysical belief, a concept of an afterlife. They understood that a dead body was once a living person, a member of their family, and that this passing was an event of great significance. The Neanderthals were not just surviving in their harsh world. They were living in it, with a culture of courage, a sense of beauty, and a mind that could contemplate the great mystery of death itself. The Neanderthals, for all their success, were primarily a European and West Asian story. This raises a fascinating question. Who was living in the rest of the vast Asian continent during this same period? For a very long time, this was one of prehistory's great blank spots. But in 2010, a discovery was made in a remote Siberian cave that was so strange and so unexpected, it felt like something out of a science fiction novel. It revealed an entirely new kind of human, a ghost from our past that we never even knew existed. Our story now takes us to the Altai Mountains in southern Siberia, to a place called Denisova Cave. It's a cold, dry, and strategically located cave that has served as a shelter for ancient humans on and off for over 300,000 years. Archaeologists digging through its layered floors have found a mix of Neanderthal and, in the upper layers, modern human tools. But in 2010, they found something that looked utterly insignificant. A single, tiny fragment of bone, smaller than a dime. It was the tip of a child's pinky finger. It was so small and unassuming that in a previous era it might have been catalogued and forgotten. But this was the dawn of a new age of science, the age of ancient DNA. Scientists at the Max Planck Institute in Germany managed to do what would have been impossible just a decade earlier. They extracted a complete genome from the tiny bone fragment. Everyone expected the DNA to match that of a Neanderthal, or perhaps an early modern human. But when the results came back, the research team was stunned. The DNA didn't match. It wasn't Neanderthal. It wasn't modern human. It belonged to a new lineage of hominin, a completely separate branch of the human family tree that science had never seen before. They were named, simply, the Denisovans, after the cave where their only definitive proof of existence had been found. This discovery was revolutionary because the Denisovans are what we now call a ghost lineage. For the first time, a new human species was discovered, not by analyzing the shape of a fossil skull or skeleton, but almost entirely from its genetic code. To this day, we still have almost no idea what the Denisovans looked like. The entirety of their physical remains consists of that one pinky bone, 3 large teeth, and a fragment of a jawbone found in Tibet. We have their complete genetic instruction manual, but we can't see the person it built. We know them only by the genetic echo they left behind in the dirt of a Siberian cave, and, as we would soon discover, in the DNA of living people today. The genetic evidence tells us a clear story. The Denisovans and the Neanderthals were sister species, sharing a common ancestor who lived perhaps 600,000 years ago. After their lineages split, the Neanderthals went west, dominating Europe and the Middle East, while the Denisovans went east, spreading out across the vast and still largely unexplored continent of Asia. And here is where the story gets truly incredible. We know that the Denisovans didn't just go extinct. They met and interbred with the modern humans who later entered Asia. The proof is alive and well today. Many modern human populations in East Asia, and especially in Melanesia and Papua New Guinea, carry a significant amount of Denisovan DNA. But this isn't just a quirky ancestral footnote. In one of the most amazing discoveries of recent genetics, scientists found that modern Tibetan people are able to thrive in the thin, low-oxygen air of the high Tibetan plateau thanks to a specific gene variant called EPAS1. This gene is their secret to high-altitude living. And when they traced its origin, they found it wasn't a modern human innovation. It was a direct genetic inheritance from the Denisovans. Our ancestors, arriving in this new land, received a crucial genetic gift from the Denisovans, who had already been living and adapting there for hundreds of thousands of years. The discovery of this ghost lineage shattered our simple picture of the past, revealing a world that was far more crowded and complex than we had ever dared to imagine. While the Neanderthals were mastering the frozen landscapes of Europe and the ghost lineage of the Denisovans was spreading across Asia, the great evolutionary furnace of Africa was forging yet another new kind of human. For hundreds of thousands of years, the African descendants of Homo erectus had continued to evolve, their brains growing larger, their tools becoming more refined. And then, around 300,000 years ago, at a site in modern-day Morocco called Jebel Irhoud, a new species appears in the fossil record. They were anatomically distinct from all that had come before, a new and startlingly modern form of human. They were us, Homo sapiens, the wise man. When you look at one of these first sapien skulls, you are, for the first time, looking in a mirror. The heavy brow ridges of their ancestors are greatly reduced. The face is flat and tucked in underneath the front of the brain, rather than projecting out in front of it. And for the first time, we see a feature that is uniquely and bizarrely ours. A pointy, bony chin jutting out from the jaw. No other hominin species, not one, has ever had a true chin. Its purpose remains one of evolution's little mysteries. But the most significant change was the overall shape of the skull. While a Neanderthal skull was long and low, like a football, the sapien skull was short, high, and rounded, a shape scientists call globular, like a soccer ball. This new shape didn't necessarily mean a bigger brain than a Neanderthal's, but it reflects a fundamental reorganization of the brain inside. Our brains had expanded in key areas, particularly the parietal and frontal lobes, areas associated with complex planning, abstract thought, sensory integration, and, crucially, language. Our bodies were different too. Compared to the powerfully built, robust Neanderthals, we were more slender and graceful, with lighter bones. We were a tropical model, built for efficiency and long-distance travel, not for cold resistance and brute force. So here we were, anatomically modern humans, equipped with our new bodies and our newly shaped brains, ready to take over the world. But a funny thing happened. For a very long time, we didn't. For the first 200,000 years of our species' existence, a span of time 4 times longer than all of recorded civilization, our behavior was frankly pretty unremarkable. We were just another species of human on the landscape, and not a particularly impressive one at that. If you were to examine the archaeological record from this long early period, you would find that our tools were not much different from those being made by Neanderthals at the same time. We were making perfectly functional stone points and scrapers, but there was little innovation, little creativity. We were successful hunter-gatherers, but we weren't doing anything that our evolutionary cousins weren't also doing. There was no art, no elaborate jewelry, no complex bone tools, no definitive evidence of the kind of symbolic thought that we associate with being truly human. We were anatomically modern, but, as scientists say, we were still behaviorally archaic. This presents one of the greatest puzzles in our entire story. For 200,000 years, we had the hardware. We had the modern brain, the modern vocal tract, the modern body. But we weren't yet running the revolutionary software of complex culture, symbolism, and imagination. We were a species with a supercomputer that was, for some reason, only being used as a simple calculator. Something was missing. Some switch had yet to be flipped. The question is, what was it? What happened that finally ignited that creative spark and transformed this capable but ordinary African hominin into the world-altering, globally dominant force we are today? For 200,000 years, the supercomputer of the Homo sapiens brain was running on low power. And then, somewhere around 70,000 years ago, a switch was flipped. The archaeological record, which had been so static and predictable for so long, suddenly explodes with novelty and creativity. It's a moment so dramatic that some call it the Great Leap Forward, or more accurately, the cognitive revolution. It's the moment our species finally started to use the full potential of its incredible mind. Suddenly, everywhere we look, we see innovation. Our ancestors begin using new raw materials, like bone, ivory, and antler, to create finely crafted and specialized tools that were impossible to make from stone alone. We see the invention of the first sewing needles, a tiny but revolutionary piece of technology that implies the creation of tailored clothing, essential for surviving colder climates. We see the first fishhooks and barbed harpoons, showing that they had learned to systematically exploit aquatic resources. They invented the spear thrower, or atlatl, a device that dramatically increased the range and power of their spears, making them far more effective and safer hunters. But the change was not just practical. It was a revolution of the soul. For the first time, we see undeniable evidence of a symbolic and artistic inner world. They began creating jewelry, painstakingly drilling holes into seashells to string them together as beads, a clear expression of personal identity and beauty. Their burials became more elaborate, with bodies intentionally covered in red ochre pigment and sometimes buried with valuable grave goods, like tools or ornaments, suggesting a belief in a spirit or an afterlife. In caves across the world, from Indonesia to France, they began to paint. The stunning, lifelike images of horses, bison, and lions that adorn the walls of caves like Chauvet and Lascaux are not crude doodles. They are masterpieces of art, rich with a meaning we can now only guess at. And in a German cave, they carved a flute from the bone of a vulture, a complex instrument capable of playing distinct musical notes. They had invented art, religion, and music. What caused this sudden, planet-altering explosion of creativity? The answer doesn't seem to be a change in our anatomy. Our brains had been this size and shape for 100,000 years already. The change seems to have been in our brain's software. The key innovation, most researchers now believe, was the final evolution of language into the uniquely powerful and strange tool that it is today. Earlier hominins likely had a functional proto-language, a way of communicating about the here and now. They could probably say, "Careful, there is a lion by the river." But our new language could do something they couldn't. It could talk about things that don't actually exist. It could not only say, "There is a lion by the river," but it could also say, "The lion is the spirit ancestor of our tribe." This is the power of fiction. This is the ability to gossip, to tell stories, to create and believe in shared myths. And this, it turns out, is a superpower. You can't get 100 chimpanzees to cooperate on a single task because their social order is based on intimate, one-on-one knowledge of each other. But you can get 100,000 humans to build a pyramid, or 1,000,000 to fight in an army, if they all believe in the same shared story, in the same God, the same nation, the same set of laws, the same idea of money. This ability to unite millions of strangers around a common myth is what allowed Homo sapiens to cooperate with a flexibility and on a scale that had never been seen before in nature. This was the secret weapon that finally unlocked our potential. It wasn't a sharper spear or a stronger body. It was the invention of the story. Armed with this new cognitive toolkit, the power of symbolic language and shared fictions, Homo sapiens was no longer just another clever ape. We had become something new, a creature that could cooperate in large, flexible numbers and could rapidly adapt to new challenges by changing its stories, not its genes. This new power immediately fueled an expansion out of Africa, a final migration that would make all previous journeys look like a stroll in the park. This was Out of Africa 2.0, and this time there would be no stopping us. This was not the slow, generational creep of Homo erectus. This was a blitz. Beginning around 70,000 years ago, bands of anatomically modern humans, driven perhaps by climate change or simple population pressure, began to push out of their African homeland. They moved with a speed and a purpose never before seen. They followed the coastlines of the Indian Ocean, rapidly spreading across Asia. In what is one of the most astonishing feats in all of human history, they reached the continent of Australia by at least 50,000 years ago. Think about what this means. To get to Australia, even during the Ice Age when sea levels were lower, they would have had to make multiple intentional sea crossings over stretches of open ocean. They had invented seafaring. They had built boats or rafts and had set out into the unknown, a cognitive and technological leap that no other human species had ever made. From Asia, they pushed north into the vast, cold plains of Siberia. Around 45,000 years ago, they entered Europe, a continent that had been the exclusive domain of the Neanderthals for hundreds of thousands of years. They adapted to the brutal cold, not by evolving shorter, stockier bodies like the Neanderthals had, but by using their minds. They used their bone needles to sew together sophisticated, tailored clothing of animal hides and fur, creating personal microclimates that allowed their tropical adapted bodies to survive the Ice Age. Their adaptability was their defining feature. While Neanderthals were specialists of the cold and Homo erectus was confined to the temperate zones, Homo sapiens became a master of every environment on Earth. From the frozen tundra of the Arctic to the dense, humid rainforests of the tropics and the arid deserts of Australia, we used our culture, not our biology, to solve the problems of survival. We didn't need to evolve thick fur. We invented the parka. We didn't need to evolve fins. We invented the canoe. This ability to adapt through technology and culture is infinitely faster and more flexible than the slow grind of genetic evolution. It was our greatest advantage. Finally, having conquered Asia, they performed the last great act of human colonization. Sometime around 20,000 years ago, they followed herds of mammoth and bison across the Bering Land Bridge, a stretch of land that connected Siberia and Alaska during the last ice age. They had set foot in the Americas. From there, their expansion was like a wildfire, spreading from the Arctic ice fields to the tip of South America in just a few thousand years. In the grand scheme of evolutionary time, it was a heartbeat. In just 50,000 years, one species of African ape had gone from living in a small corner of one continent to inhabiting every habitable corner of the globe. But we must remember one crucial fact. As these modern humans spread into Europe and Asia, these lands were not empty. They were not a pristine wilderness waiting to be discovered. They were already home to other, older, and equally intelligent human species who had been living there successfully for hundreds of thousands of years. This great migration was not an exploration. It was an invasion. And for the first time in 500,000 years, our long-lost cousins, the Neanderthals and the Denisovans, were about to come face to face with these strange, slender, and relentlessly creative new arrivals from the south. Let's pause our time machine for a moment and hover, godlike, above the earth, circa 50,000 years ago. Let's take a census of the human family. What you would see is a world more humanly diverse than at any other time in history, before or since. To our modern eyes, accustomed to being the only humans on the block, it would look like a scene from a fantasy novel. It was a planet of many peoples. In Africa, the great mother continent, you would still find our own species, Homo sapiens, living in diverse groups, continuing to evolve and thrive. As we saw, some bands of them have already pushed out into the Middle East, the vanguard of the great migration to come. Then you would turn your gaze to Europe, from the shores of the Atlantic to the mountains of Western Asia. This is Neanderthal country. They are the established population here, the kings of the Ice Age, powerful, intelligent, and perfectly adapted to their cold, hard world. They have been here for hundreds of thousands of years. This is their home. You would then scan your eyes across the immense, sprawling continent of Asia. This vast territory is the home of the Denisovans. We see them only as shadows, a ghost lineage. But they are there, from the frigid caves of Siberia to, likely, the warmer jungles of the southeast. They are a great and mysterious eastern branch of the human family. But that's not all. If you zoom in on the Indonesian archipelago, on the small isolated island of Flores, you would see something truly extraordinary. In the forests, there lives another human species, one that looks like it stepped out of a fairy tale. It is Homo floresiensis, nicknamed the Hobbit. Standing just a little over 3 feet tall, these tiny humans are a remarkable example of evolution at work. Their ancestors were likely Homo erectus, who became stranded on the island hundreds of thousands of years earlier. In an environment with limited resources and no large predators, they evolved through a process called insular dwarfism, the same process that creates pygmy elephants and other miniature island animals. Despite their small, grapefruit-sized brains, they made sophisticated stone tools and hunted. They were another successful, long-lived, and completely unique human experiment. And these are just the ones we know about. The fossil record is a tattered book with most of its pages missing. Who knows what other human species might have been hiding in the dense jungles of Central Africa, or in the isolated mountain valleys of the Himalayas. For a very long time, this was the normal state of humanity. The idea of a world with only one human species would have seemed strange. It would be like a world with only one species of bear, or one species of deer. For millions of years, the Earth was home to a branching bush of bipedal apes. Our current solitude is the strange modern exception, not the ancient rule. This lost world of human diversity raises the most tantalizing question in our entire story. These groups were not living in hermetically sealed boxes. As the newly arrived sapiens pushed further into Asia and Europe, their territories would have inevitably overlapped with the homelands of the Neanderthals and the Denisovans. They would have seen each other. They would have competed for the same hunting grounds, the same caves, the same watering holes. They would have met. So what happened in those moments of contact? What goes through the mind of a sapiens hunter when he comes across a powerfully built Neanderthal family butchering a mammoth? Fear, aggression, curiosity. The answer, as it turns out, is far more intimate and surprising than we ever imagined. For decades, the question of what happened when we met our ancient cousins was dominated by two competing theories. The first, the replacement theory, was a grim, dramatic story. It argued that our superior intelligence and technology allowed us to completely outcompete our brutish relatives, driving them to extinction through violence or by simply starving them out. The second, the interbreeding theory, painted a much more peaceful picture of these different human groups meeting, merging, and eventually becoming one single population. For a long time, there was no way to know for sure which story was true. But the answer was hiding in a place no one had ever been able to look before. Not in the fossils, but inside the living cells of every person on Earth. The breakthrough came in the 2010s, with the dawn of paleogenetics. An international team of scientists, led by the brilliant Svante Pääbo, achieved what was once thought to be science fiction. They managed to painstakingly piece together the entire genome of a Neanderthal, and then a Denisovan, using tiny fragments of DNA extracted from ancient, fossilized bones. For the first time, we had the complete genetic instruction manual for these other human species. The next obvious step was to compare them to our own. The results were an absolute bombshell. They changed our understanding of our own identity forever. When the scientists compared the Neanderthal genome to the genomes of modern people from all around the world, they found a perfect match. Every single person today whose ancestry comes from outside of sub-Saharan Africa carries Neanderthal DNA. On average, between 1 and 4% of your genome, if you have European or Asian ancestry, is of direct Neanderthal origin. The story was just as clear with the Denisovans. Modern populations in East Asia, and especially in Papua New Guinea and Australia, carry significant amounts of Denisovan DNA, in some cases up to 6%. The implications were staggering. The replacement theory was not the whole story. We had not just wiped them out. We had had children with them. This was not a single freak event. The genetic patterns suggest that it happened multiple times, in different places, as our ancestors spread across the world. The human family tree was not a clean set of diverging branches. It was a tangled, messy web. The great human story was not one of genocide, but of a family reunion. Those encounters at the river bend were not always violent confrontations. Sometimes they were moments of curiosity, of alliance, and of intimacy. And this genetic inheritance was not just a quirky ancestral souvenir. It was a key to our survival. Remember, our sapiens ancestors were tropical apes, fresh out of Africa. They arrived in the cold, cloudy landscapes of Europe and Asia with a biology adapted for the African sun and African diseases. Neanderthals and Denisovans, on the other hand, had been living in Eurasia for hundreds of thousands of years. They were biologically adapted to the local climate, the local foods, and, most importantly, the local pathogens. Interbreeding with them was an incredible evolutionary shortcut. Instead of having to wait tens of thousands of years for our own immune systems to slowly adapt to the new viruses and bacteria, we could instantly acquire those defenses by borrowing the genes from the locals. And that is exactly what happened. A huge portion of the Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA that remains active in our genomes today is related to the immune system. The specific genes that help your body identify and fight off certain viruses are, for many of us, a direct gift from our ancient cousins. Other inherited genes are related to how our bodies process fat, to our skin's reaction to ultraviolet radiation, and as we saw with the Tibetans, even our ability to breathe at high altitudes. Our species' triumphant spread across the globe was not something we did alone. Our success was, in part, thanks to the legacy of the very people we were replacing. Their ghosts are not just a part of our history. They are a living, working part of us. Our species' story is not just one of creation, but also one of disappearance. The genetic record proves that our family reunion was, at times, an intimate one. But the fossil record tells a much starker and more brutal story. Wherever our Homo sapiens ancestors arrived, the other human species that had lived there for hundreds of thousands of years vanished. In Europe, the last Neanderthals disappear from the fossil record around 40,000 years ago, just a few thousand years after we first set foot on the continent. A similar pattern holds for the Denisovans in Asia and even the tiny hobbits on their Indonesian island. The correlation is too powerful to ignore. Our arrival on the scene was followed by the silence of extinction. This leads us to what is perhaps the most profound and haunting question in our entire history. What happened to them? Why, after millions of years of human diversity, are we the only ones left? This is prehistory's greatest mystery, and the answer likely lies in a complex and uncomfortable combination of factors. The disappearance of the Neanderthals is one of prehistory's greatest mysteries. Did we actively hunt them down? Genocide? Did we simply outcompete them for resources with our superior technology and social networks? Did a changing climate finish them off? Or were they simply absorbed into our much larger population through interbreeding? Let's consider the possibilities. The most chilling scenario is one of active, violent conflict. Given our species' well-documented history of intolerance and tribal violence, it's certainly plausible that our ancestors treated their evolutionary cousins as enemies to be eliminated. However, there is very little direct archaeological evidence for widespread warfare between the species. We don't find Neanderthal sites littered with sapiens' spear points, or vice versa. While conflicts surely happened, a deliberate continent-wide genocide seems unlikely. A more subtle and more widely accepted theory is one of competition. It may not have been a bloody war, but a slow, grinding economic struggle. Our sapiens ancestors, with their new cognitive toolkit, had a slight edge. Our spear throwers allowed us to hunt more safely and efficiently. Our sewing needles allowed us to make better cold weather clothing, meaning we expended fewer calories just staying warm. Our larger social networks, bound together by myth and story, allowed for more effective trade and mutual support during hard times. The Neanderthals were brilliant and tough, But we were just a little bit better at extracting energy from the environment and at having babies who survived to reproductive age. In the unforgiving mathematics of evolution, even a 1 or 2% advantage, compounded over 100 generations, is the difference between thriving and disappearing. We didn't have to kill them. We just had to be slightly more successful. We slowly, and perhaps unintentionally, drove them into the margins and took their world. We also have to remember the backdrop against which all this was happening. The last ice age was a time of extreme and rapid climate instability. The Neanderthals, though adapted to the cold, were already under immense stress from these fluctuating conditions. Then we, a new and highly adaptable competitor, arrived on the scene. It's possible that our arrival was simply the final straw for a population that was already struggling to survive. Finally, there is the absorption model. Perhaps they didn't so much vanish as they were swallowed. The waves of Homo sapiens migrating out of Africa were likely far larger in number than the resident Neanderthal and Denisovan populations. It's possible that, through steady interbreeding, their smaller gene pools were simply diluted into our much larger one. They may have disappeared not because they failed, but because they were so successful at integrating that they vanished as a distinct people. In all likelihood, there is no single answer. The truth is probably a tragic combination of all these factors. The Neanderthals, already weakened by a changing climate, found themselves competing for dwindling resources with a new, clever, and rapidly multiplying species. They occasionally fought, they occasionally interbred, but in the end, they were simply outnumbered, outcompeted, and genetically overwhelmed. Whatever the precise combination of causes, the result was the same. A world that had, for millions of years, been home to a diverse family of humans was, in the geological blink of an eye, left with only one. And so, the silence fell. Around 40,000 years ago, the last Neanderthal hearth went cold. Sometime after that, the last Denisovan voice faded into the wind. On the island of Flores, the last of the hobbits disappeared. After at least 4 million years of a world bustling with a diverse family of bipedal apes, a world where meeting a different kind of human was a normal, if perhaps dangerous part of life, there was now only one. For the first time, a single human species had the entire planet to itself. Us. We need to pause and truly absorb the strangeness of this situation. Our current solitude is not the norm. It is a profound and very recent anomaly. For the entire history of the genus Homo leading up to this point, the world was a much more interesting, more varied place. To a Homo erectus living in Asia, the idea that there was only one kind of human would have been absurd. To a Neanderthal in Europe, it would have been unimaginable. Sharing the world was the only reality they ever knew. It's as if, today, you woke up and found that all species of bear, except for the polar bear, had gone extinct, or all big cats, except for the lion, had vanished. That's how strange our current situation is from a deep time perspective. We are the last branch left on a once thriving family bush. This solitude has, I think, shaped our perception of ourselves. It has made it easy for us to believe that our success was inevitable, that we are the pinnacle of evolution, the end point of a long linear march of progress. It allows us to draw a clear, sharp line between human and animal. But the ghosts of our cousins tell a different story. Our survival was not preordained. We are the product of a series of cosmic accidents and strange quirks of fate. After all, we weren't the strongest. A Neanderthal could have thrown any one of us across a room. We weren't the most biologically adapted. A Neanderthal's stocky body was a far better furnace for surviving an ice age winter than our slender tropical frame. We didn't even have the biggest brains. The Neanderthals, on average, had more cranial capacity than we did. So, if we weren't the strongest, the best adapted, or the biggest brained, why are we the only ones left? The answer, it seems, lies in that strange and unlikely superpower we acquired during the cognitive revolution. It was our unique brand of cooperative fiction. It was that bizarre ability to use symbolic language to create and believe in stories that do not exist in the physical world. This was the one weird trick that, it seems, our cousins never fully mastered. The Neanderthals might have been brilliant individual hunters and small group survivors, but they seemingly could not organize themselves into tribes of thousands based on a shared belief in a mythical spirit ancestor or a tribal god. This ability to unite vast numbers of strangers around a common story was our winning ticket in the evolutionary lottery. It allowed us to create vast trade networks, to maintain social cohesion over huge distances, and to mount coordinated efforts on a scale that was simply impossible for the small, family-based groups of other human species. Our victory was not one of brawn or even brain, but of imagination. We didn't conquer the world by being stronger, we conquered it by telling better stories. We are not the chosen ones. We are the accidental, and now very lonely, sole survivors. Our solitude on this planet has made it easy to forget where we came from, to feel disconnected from the deep, animal past that shaped us. But the entire epic story we have just journeyed through is not a remote, academic tale. It is your story, and the proof is not in a distant museum or a dusty fossil bed. It is inside you. Your own body, right now, as you lie there listening, is a living, breathing museum of this 4-million-year history. Every part of you is an artifact, a relic of an ancient struggle. Let's take a tour. Feel the gentle S-curve in your spine. That is the legacy of Lucy and the first Australopithecines, the anatomical compromise they made to stand upright on the African savanna. The occasional twinge in your lower back is the echo of that ancient bargain. Think about your legs, long and springy, and your skin, capable of erupting in a cooling sweat. That is the ghost of Homo erectus within you, the endurance runner, the relentless hunter jogging down prey under the midday sun. Your hands, with their delicate, precise grip, are the descendants of the hands that first chipped a stone to make an older one chopper. And your jaw, small and weak compared to your ancestors, is a direct result of the brilliant minds that invented that chopper, and later mastered the fire to cook their food, outsourcing the work of chewing to technology. Look in a mirror tomorrow, and you will see the high, rounded forehead that houses the great frontal lobes that sparked the cognitive revolution. Your ability to understand these very words, to weave stories and to think about the future, is a direct inheritance from those sapiens ancestors who first painted on cave walls and sang songs around a fire. And deep in the nucleus of every cell in your body, your DNA carries the full, sprawling text of this journey. For many of you, it even contains a few borrowed sentences, a paragraph or two from the Neanderthals and the Denisovans, a living record of that strange and intimate family reunion on the plains of ancient Eurasia. But the museum of your body displays not just our triumphs, but also our ghosts and our glitches. Many of our modern anxieties and ailments are a direct result of the fact that we are running Stone Age software on Space Age hardware. This is the concept of evolutionary mismatch. Your craving for sugary, salty, and fatty foods, for instance, is not a personal failing. It is a deep-seated survival instinct. For 99% of our history, calories were scarce, and finding a source of sugar like a ripe fruit or a honeycomb, or a source of fat like bone marrow, was a massive evolutionary win. Your brain is hardwired to reward you with a rush of pleasure for consuming these things. In the ancient savannah, this instinct kept you alive. In a modern world with a fast food restaurant on every corner, that same instinct can be a path to obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. Similarly, your brain's fight or flight response, your capacity for anxiety, is a beautifully adapted system for surviving immediate physical threats. It's what told your ancestor to run when they heard a rustle in the tall grass that might be a lion. The problem is, today, that same ancient alarm system is being triggered not by lions, but by traffic jams, by an angry email from your boss, by a notification on your phone. Your brain is still constantly scanning for predators in a world where the threats are now chronic, abstract, and psychological. You are not separate from this story. You are this story. Your body is an archive, a testament to every ancestor who survived, every choice they made, and every world they inhabited. The museum of your body shows how our ancient past shapes our physical health, but the mismatch runs even deeper. The most profound legacy of our evolution is not in our bones or our appetites, but in our minds. We are, each of us, running a Stone Age brain in a 21st century world. And this is especially true when it comes to our social lives. The greatest challenges we face today, from political polarization to the anxieties of social media, have their roots in a mind that was wired for a world that has long since vanished. For almost the entirety of our species' history, your entire social universe would have been a small, tight-knit band of hunter-gatherers. The anthropologist Robin Dunbar famously studied the link between the size of a primate's neocortex and the size of its social group. He discovered a cognitive limit, a maximum number of individuals with whom one can maintain stable, meaningful relationships. For humans, that number is about 150. For hundreds of thousands of years, your world was this tribe of 150 people. You knew every single person in your band intimately. You knew their parents, their children, their strengths, their weaknesses, their history. Trust was not an abstract concept. It was built on a lifetime of daily, face-to-face interaction. Your survival, and the survival of everyone you cared about, depended on the cohesion of this small group. Now, contrast that with the world you live in today. You live in a city of millions, a nation of hundreds of millions. You might have thousands of friends or followers online. You are asked to care about and form opinions on people and events happening on the other side of the planet, a place you will never see, involving people you will never meet. Your Stone Age brain, for all its creative genius, was simply not built for this scale. It has no software to process 1 million people as individuals. Faced with this overwhelming anonymous scale, your brain does what it was programmed to do. It defaults to its ancient wiring. It tries to shrink the world back down to a manageable, tribal size. It instinctively divides the incomprehensible mass of humanity into two simple categories: us and them. Our innate and often dangerous tribalism is a direct echo of this cognitive limit. It's the reason we so easily form in-groups and out-groups. why we rally around a flag, a sports team, or a political party with such fierce loyalty, and why we often view those outside our tribe with suspicion and hostility. It's a survival strategy that was essential for a small band of foragers competing for resources, but it can be catastrophic in a globally interconnected civilization. This mismatch haunts our digital lives as well. Our brains evolved to handle social feedback, approval, rejection, gossip, in the context of a small group where social harmony was crucial. Today, that same ancient system is being bombarded by likes, shares, and comments from thousands of strangers, triggering our deep-seated need for social validation and our primal fear of social rejection on an unprecedented scale. It's why an anonymous nasty comment online can feel like a genuine physical threat. Your brain's ancient software is interpreting it as a sign that you might be cast out of the tribe, which for 99% of our history was a death sentence. We are, in essence, running an ancient operating system on modern hardware, an operating system designed for the predictable, small-scale social world of the Pleistocene is now struggling to run the infinitely complex, data-saturated application of globalized digital society. It is no wonder that the system is prone to bugs, glitches, and crashes. Understanding this mismatch is not an excuse for our worst impulses, but it is a critical piece of self-awareness. It's a reminder that, at our core, we are still that same social primate, huddled together for safety, trying to make sense of a world that is changing far faster than our brains can evolve. And so, we bring our time machine to a halt. We have journeyed across 4 million years, from a nervous, ape-like creature taking its first shaky steps onto the savannah, to a planet-altering force that can split the atom and walk on the surface of the moon. We have witnessed the first spark of ingenuity in a sharpened stone, felt the warmth of the first controlled fire, and tracked the ghostly footprints of our ancestors across continents and through the deep chasms of time. We have seen our family bush grow thick with new and varied branches, and we have watched, with a sense of awe and sorrow, as all of those other branches withered away, leaving only our own. It is a dizzying, improbable, and epic story. But it is crucial to remember that it is not over. It is a profound mistake to see ourselves as the pinnacle of creation, the final perfected end point of the evolutionary story. We are not the destination. We are just one chapter in a book that is still being written. Evolution did not stop with us. The same forces of selection and adaptation that shaped our ancestors are at work on us right now, and will continue to shape our descendants long after we are gone. The journey continues. The great irony is that the challenges we face today, as a global civilization of 8 billion people, are the very same challenges our ancestors faced as a tiny band of foragers. The force that first drove us out of the trees and sparked our entire lineage, climate change, is once again the great existential test of our time. Only now, we are its cause. The skill that allowed us to thrive, our ability to cooperate to overcome challenges, is the one we now need most, but on a planetary scale, our tribal minds can barely comprehend. The evolutionary history we have explored is therefore not just a story. It is an instruction manual, and it is a warning. It is an instruction manual in that it shows us our strengths, our unmatched creativity, our profound capacity for cooperation, our ability to adapt to any challenge through the power of our shared imagination. But it is also a warning. The ghosts of the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, and all the other lost hominins are a stark reminder that success is never permanent. Extinction is the rule. Survival is the rare and precious exception. The same tribal instincts that kept our ancestors safe in small groups now threaten to tear our global civilization apart. The same cleverness that allowed us to invent the hand axe now allows us to build weapons of unimaginable destruction. Our story is the story of a creature whose technological and cultural power has far outpaced its psychological and emotional evolution. The greatest challenge for the sole survivor of the human family is to finally learn to live with itself. And now, the journey is over. The great sweep of deep time begins to recede, the images of ancient worlds and bygone peoples fading like a dream upon waking. The hum of the time machine softens, and we are left in the quiet of the present moment. The epic struggles on the savannah, the flickering of the first fire, the silent encounters in an ice age valley, all of it has led to this, to you. Lying here, safe in your own time, a vessel of memory, a living archive of a story 4 million years in the making. The challenges of that ancient world are gone, replaced by the quiet comforts of your own. The night is no longer filled with the roar of predators, but perhaps only the gentle hum of a fan or the distant sound of traffic. The great journey is done, and it is time to rest. Let the weight of all those millennia settle, and let your mind drift, carried on the slow, deep currents of time, towards a peaceful and well-earned sleep. The story is now a part of you. Rest easy, soul survivor.